All right, so we're diving deep today into Death Row Records, a label, I gotta say, with a reputation as big as its beats.
Yeah, yeah. And for good reason. If you're tuning in, you're clearly interested in Death Row, which means you're about to step into a story of musical innovation, larger-than-life personalities, and, well, a fair share of controversy, to say the least.
For sure. So let's unpack it. For those who might just be getting into this, Death Row was founded way back in 1991 by Suge Knight and Dr. Dre. It's wild how quickly it became the sound of West Coast hip hop, almost like it defined the genre in a way.
It's fascinating how Death Row didn't just ride the wave of gangsta rap, it practically created it, you know? Like a tsunami. Think Dr. Dre's The Chronic. That album took G-Funk, this blend of funk samples, hard-hitting beats, and this really laid-back groove, and made it the soundtrack for, well, like a whole era.
Totally. When I hear The Chronic, I don't just hear music, I hear an attitude. It's like Dre took the raw energy from the streets and mixed it with this like sonic richness that was totally new, and it just exploded.
Exactly, exactly. And it wasn't just the sound, it was the stories, too, right?
Mhm.
Death row artists like Tupac, Snoop Dogg, they were telling stories rooted in their realities, often, really harsh realities.
Right.
And that rawness, that authenticity, it resonated with people who felt unheard.
And then there's Suge Knight, right? The man who, let's face it, was as much a part of that Death Row brand as the music itself. He was this imposing figure, and some say he used that, along with his sharp business sense to kind of build the label's reputation.
It's true. Suge was a master almost of image and branding, knew how to make a statement, whether through the music, the album art, or even his own persona. He understood the power of controversy, and he definitely wasn't afraid to use it.
But do you think that was all calculated, or was it like more a part of Suge's personality, that kind of almost mythical aura that drew people in?
That's a really interesting question, and it's tough to separate the man from the myth, honestly. We know Suja was, well, a controversial figure, and his reputation definitely added to the mystique of the label. But it also overshadowed the music at times, which brings us to, well, the darker side of Death Row's story.
Right. Can't really talk about Death Row without acknowledging the violence and legal battles that kind of became part of the label's whole thing. It's like this dark cloud hanging over all this incredible music they put out.
Absolutely. And it's impossible to ignore the role of the whole East Coast-West Coast rivalry in hip-hop during that time. That rivalry, fueled by media hype and personal beefs, it cast a shadow over the whole industry. And Death Row was right in the middle of it.
It's almost tragic, isn't it? This incredible creativity, innovation, all mixed up with so much darkness. Makes you wonder what could have been if things had gone differently.
Yeah. But here's the thing. What's really fascinating is that despite all of that, there's this resurgence of interest in Death Row. People are rediscovering the music, revisiting the history, and trying to understand the legacy of this, well, complex and controversial label.
And there's that upcoming documentary, right? It's promising to show us some never-before-heard stories from the people who were actually there. I think we'll get a different perspective on Suge Knight, maybe see a side of him that's been hidden.
It's definitely possible. We might hear from artists, producers, behind-the-scenes figures who can give us insights into Suge's personality, his motivations, maybe even his role in shaping Death Row.
I'm really curious to hear from the producers and engineers especially. They were the ones crafting this groundbreaking sound, and their perspective on the creative process, the studio atmosphere, the pressures of working at Death Row, that would be fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. Their stories could shed light on the whole dynamic between Suge, Dr. Dre, and the other artists. Give us a deeper understanding of the creative tensions and collaborations that fueled Death Row's success.
It's easy to get lost in all the drama, but we got to remember the music. Death Row, I mean, they had some of the biggest names in hip hop, and that influence, it's still felt today.
Oh, for sure. For sure. You can draw like a direct line from Death Row to how hip-hop sounds now.
Yeah.
Think about all the artists who learned from Dr. Dre, Snoop, Eminem, 50 Cent even. They all have that Death Row DNA, woven right into their music.
And what's interesting is how they managed to like balance that hardcore gangster rap with this smoother, almost soulful vibe. You had Tupac, raw intensity and all, alongside Snoop's smooth flow. And it all worked somehow.
That's the thing about Death Row. They tapped into like the full spectrum of that West Coast sound.
Yeah.
Not afraid to experiment, blend genres, push the
Right.
limits even. That's what made them so groundbreaking.
And the visuals, man, can't forget the visuals. They understood image. Their music videos were like mini movies full of style, attitude, a little danger even.
Oh, absolutely. They created a whole visual language,
Yeah.
captivating and controversial all at once.
Yeah.
And it played a huge role in how they built their brand for sure.
Do you think that sense of danger, that edge is what drew people in?
It's possible, right? There's something about like the forbidden, the taboo, that's alluring. And Death Row, they played on that for sure. Weren't afraid to stir up controversy, and it fueled their rise, no question.
But there was a price, right? All the violence, the feuds, the legal battles, it took its toll.
You're absolutely right. It's like a cautionary tale almost about what happens when you blur the lines between art and, well, actual life. When your image is all about aggression, defiance, it can be hard to keep that separate from reality.
Makes you wonder about the artists too. How'd they handle that environment? Were they caught up in it all or trying to stay above it?
Tough to say for sure, but I'd guess it was a mix, honestly. Some thrived in that chaos, while others, they struggled to keep their sanity, their safety even.
Tupac comes to mind, right? He was so outspoken about the realities of street life, but there was also this poetic side, this vulnerability that came through in his music, almost like he was caught between two worlds.
Tupac's fascinating because he became like a symbol of both the hope and the despair of his generation. He represented the struggle, the anger, the violence, but also offered a vision for something better.
And his death, man, so young. Devastating loss, not just for hip hop, but for everyone. Like a symbol of how destructive things were, how communities were being torn apart.
It's true. A stark reminder that talent, fame, it doesn't protect you from the world's harsh realities. Sometimes the brightest lights, they burn out the fastest.
Death Row's whole story is full of these contradictions. Incredible talent and creativity mixed with tragedy, violence. It's like a reminder that the music industry, like life, it's full of complexities.
What's crucial is that we don't shy away from that.
Yeah.
We got to examine it all, the good, the bad, the ugly, to really get Death Row's legacy.
And maybe, just maybe, we can learn from their mistakes, right? As people, as an industry. See the danger in glorifying violence, exploitation, work towards a system that's more fair, more equitable for all artists.
Absolutely. The music industry has a responsibility to support and protect the people who make the music, not just, use them for profit.
So, where do you think Death Row's legacy stands today? Is it more about the music or the drama?
I think it's both, honestly. You can't really separate them. It's a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition goes unchecked, about the allure of fame.
But it's also a story of incredible creativity, innovation. They pushed hip hop forward, no doubt. Their influence can't be denied.
That's the thing. Even though they were around for, what, a relatively short time, their impact on music, on culture, it's huge.
That's what keeps their story so captivating, I think. Even amidst the chaos, great art can emerge. And it's up to us to learn from the past, appreciate the music, and work towards a better future.
Well said. I think the takeaway here is that their legacy, it's complicated, multifaceted. They left a ton of amazing music, but their story also shows us the dark side of the industry.
Yeah. It's a story that keeps people fascinated, and I have a feeling this new documentary is going to spark even more conversations about Death Row, their music, their impact, everything.
I agree. It'll be interesting to see how they handle the more, let's say, difficult parts of their history, and if they bring anything new to the table about what motivated the key players, what they did, all of that.
I'm really curious to hear from the artists, especially what it was like to be a part of Death Row back in the day.
Me too. To hear how they navigated the pressure, the creative process, the whole atmosphere, which, let's be honest, was often pretty turbulent.
Maybe, just maybe, this documentary will help us all understand their legacy in a new light, appreciate the music, but also acknowledge the complexities, the contradictions in their story.
I think that's a great goal, to engage with the whole story, good and bad,
Yeah.
and use it to start a bigger conversation about the music industry, its challenges, its potential.
Because at the end of the day, their story reflects our own society, right? The
Yeah.
triumphs and the failures.
And by looking at their story, maybe we can learn a little more about ourselves and the world we live in.
Talking about all this, it hits me that Death Row, it's not just about one label or even just hip hop. It's like a snapshot of a moment in time, in American culture.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. You can't really separate death row from what was going on back then, early 90s.
Mm.
The riots in LA, the gang violence, the economic struggles. It all fed into the music, the label's whole image even.
And for people like me who weren't there, who didn't live through it, the music, it's like a window into that world, right? You hear the anger, the frustration, even a sense of hopelessness.
It's fascinating because they both reflected and shaped that reality. On one hand, giving a voice to communities that were being ignored, telling stories you didn't hear anywhere else, but on the other, kind of glamorizing the violence, the gangster lifestyle too.
It's like they were holding up this mirror to society, showing the good and the bad, all of it. And that's what makes it so interesting. Even now, all these years later, art can be a force for change, but also reflect the problems we face.
Yeah, and it makes you think, right? About the music we listen to, the context it came from, the messages it might be sending.
Easy to get lost in the beat, the lyrics, but we got to remember music has power. It can shape how we think, how we feel, even what we do.
Absolutely. That's why these conversations are important, to dig deeper. Look at the stories behind the music and think about what kind of impact it has on us, on society as a whole.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive here into Death Row Records, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners?
Hmm. I'd say it's a reminder that even when things are tough, when there's controversy, creativity can still thrive. But also it's a warning,
Yeah.
about what happens when ambition goes unchecked and how important it is to use your platform, whatever it is, responsibly.
Well said. Death Row left behind, well, a lot. A legacy that's complicated, for sure. One that inspires, challenges, provokes, all of that. And as we keep exploring music, it's good to remember every song, every album, there's a story there. And it's up to us to listen, to engage with those stories, really think about them.
Because music is more than just something fun to listen to, right? It's a reflection of who we are, where we've been, where we're going. And by understanding those stories, those histories, we can understand ourselves and the world a little bit better.
Powerful stuff. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Death Row Records. It's been quite a journey, full of insights, contradictions, and of course, a ton of great music.
My pleasure. And hey, keep exploring, keep listening, keep asking questions. There's always more to learn, more to discover in the world of music.